Welcome back to another edition of Diamond Star Stories here on White Sox Fan Card Collector. In our latest episode, we are actually featuring a White Sox player. This is Zeke Bonura. So I have a little bit of information about Zeke, but I also have a story about him, and I'll talk a little bit more about the source of that story when I get a chance to get to that part of the presentation. So here we are. We have a 1935 Diamond Star Zeke Bonura. Obviously, this is the second year of the Diamond Star releases, the first one being 34 and the last being 36. This is card number 65. It's in a PSA 2. Probably because the centering is not good top to bottom. Other than that, it just has pretty much normal wear and tear for the era. It has the green ink background. It has his 1934 stats listed here on the bottom. And here he is pictured in a White Sox uniform, even though they don't really feature the uniform features much at all in this card, because it doesn't have it on the cap, nor does it have it on the jersey. I'm not entirely sure why that was the choice to be able to do that for his card. But either way, here we got Zeke. All right, so Zeke for his time actually was a pretty darn good hitter, a pretty darn good player. He was born in 1908 and passed in 1987. Was born and also laid to rest in New Orleans. He attended high school there at St. Stanislaus High School, briefly attended college at Loyola University in New Orleans before he was actually brought into the major leagues after a series of years in the minor leagues. In 1934, he made his debut and played until just 1940. So he had a very short career. During that time, he accumulated a WAR of 21.2. He finished with a 307 average overall, 119 home runs, and a 704 RBIs over that period of time, as well as almost 1,100 hits. He was one hit shy of hitting 1,100 hits. So he definitely had some really good career numbers for the years that he did play. He played for White Sox, he played for the Washington Senators, the New York Giants, and could finish his career with the Chicago Cubs. His best years, he hit 330 in 1936 as well as 345 in 1937. I didn't know this, but he actually hit 138 RBIs. I believe it was in 1936. It was either 36 or 37. But his 138 RBIs of that year stood as the White Sox single season record until someone in my lifetime, Albert Joey Bell, in 1998 broke the record in his 2 brief years for the White Sox. When he was a monster for them, actually, even though they were terrible. He led the AL in fielding 4 times, actually, during his career, even though he kind of had a reputation as not being a very good fielder, so that's why they put him at first base. But he's still pretty good if he got led the league in fielding percentage 4 times. So what happened, actually, why his career was kind of cut short, is he actually enlisted in the Army in 1941 after Pearl Harbor. So he never played parts of 41 season or any season thereafter. And he was actually charged with organizing the Army baseball teams and helping organize games between different services and different camps and things like that. Both starting over here in America, but also eventually being assigned to do so in North Africa. One of the teams he was managing was the Casablanca team, if you will. Discharged as a master sergeant, and there wasn't a lot of information I found as I went in there. So, but I picked him specifically because, as I mentioned briefly in one of my recent videos, I got a book recently. So the book I got, I'll put it in front of the camera here, is by Memories of a Ball Player, and this is by Bill Werber. Bill Werber, of course, he's been featured a couple times on here because he actually was somebody that played during this era. He was a college graduate of Duke, an All-American both in baseball and basketball, and actually their first All-American in basketball. And he lived to be a really old. He was pushing near 100 years old when he actually passed. But he ended up writing a book, put him back in the corner here, talking about his time in baseball, but some of the players he played with. And actually, I was starting to read this book while I was out of town last week, and I ran across a passage about Zeke. I didn't anticipate I would probably read about him. The nice part about this book is there's stories about, obviously, the big stars. He does have his stories about Babe Ruth and Hank Greenberg and others. But he also has a story about Zeke. There's a lot of players like that in his career that he considered to be good ball players that probably weren't really remembered all that well for their contributions on the field because they've just kind of been lost to history. But also like some of their great friendships and also some of the crazy things they would do to one another in their boredom to kind of, for laughter, if you will, things that would be totally not socially accepted today. So what I'm actually going to do is actually read the passage he wrote about Zeke in here, and as opposed to kind of digging up any additional information I could find on him, and just tell you a little bit of story from the memory of Billy Werber when this book was published in 2001. Zeke played nothing but first base in his 7-year major league career. He could hit. He had a lifetime average of .307 to prove it. With the White Sox in 36 and 37, he carved out averages of .330 and .345 respectively. His fielding was another story, which probably explains his exclusive attachment to first base. He looked like a bouncing bear in his efforts to play first base. Ponderous would describe his footwork. Zeke's daddy owned a produce stand in New Orleans market, and there young Zeke lifted boxes of bananas and other produce when he was not off playing ball. He grew to be a bit over 6 feet and weighed almost 220 pounds, and was getting strong as a bull from lifting all that produce. The good Lord endowed old Zeke with a great disposition, and everyone liked him. Everyone, that is, but Hank Greenberg. Probably no one alive remembers why the usually affable Greenberg had it in for Zeke. In 1932, both played first base in the Texas League, Hank for Beaumont and Zeke for Dallas, and the story goes Greenberg got on Bonura every time the two teams played one another. Zeke shrugged it off and went about his business. If the other guy wished it to be contentious, it was no concern of his. Zeke loved everybody, even the surly pitchers who threw at his head now and again. Nonetheless, after a ball game, toward the end of the season, Hank apparently cornered Zeke and left him no choice but defend himself. Greenberg was not exactly a midget, standing almost 6'4" and weighing almost 210 pounds, but evidently he had not been hefted as many banana stalks as Bonura. If Zeke's teammates had not pulled Zeke off, it's questionable whether Greenberg would have ever made it to the American League. In 1935, my Red Sox were involved in tight game in Bonura's White Sox at Comiskey Park. Vern Kennedy was pitching for the Pale Hose. The score tied late in the game. Dusty Coke was on first base, and I occupied third with 2 outs. Kennedy had a good move towards first and liked to throw over if a base runner even took a modest lead. So Kennedy took his stretch and threw quickly to Bonura at first. Zeke made a sweep tag with his glove hand. Safe, bellowed the umpire. Bonura sort of bounced up in the air, slapped his mitt with an encouraging, "Come on, Vern, little boy," lobbed the ball back in a high arc back towards the pitching mound. Taking all this in at third, I thought to myself, if Kennedy throws over to first again and Zeke does his little dance and lobs the ball back, I'm going to take off for home. Sure enough, we had a repeat performance. Zeke slapped his glove, doing his little dance, and lobbed the ball back to Kennedy. I had taken a healthy lead off at third, and I was on my way home before the ball left Zeke's hand. I slid safely across with what turned out to be the winning run well before Kennedy could get the ball to home plate. To get to the visitors' clubhouse, to the playing field at Comiskey Park, he had to pass through the White Sox dugout. The next day, Zeke was waiting for me as I came through the passageway. He grabbed me and wrapped his arms around me, pinning my arms to my sides. I felt as I was in the embrace of a gorilla, and I pleaded, "Turn me loose, Zeke. You're cracking my ribs." "That's just what I mean to do," he said. "You made old Zeke look bad yesterday, and Dykes fined me $250. You gotta pay." But it was all in good fun. Zeke eventually turned me loose. The White Sox manager, Jimmy Dykes, traded Zeke to the Washington Senators before the 1938 season, much to the consternation of the South Side fans who regarded him as a favorite. I was playing for the Athletics and stayed at my home in College Park, Maryland, when the A's played in Washington. The Senators graciously gave me permission to use this lot whenever the players parked their cars. As luck or misfortune would have it, depending on your point of view, one afternoon, after the A's-Senators game, I went to the lot to retrieve my car, only to view an intriguing sight. There was cozying up between the automobiles was none other old Zeke, and then Thelma Griffith, the daughter of Senators owner Clark Griffith. Thelma later married Joe Hayes, a Senators pitcher, but both Zeke and she were single, and it was in broad daylight at 5 o'clock, and it was only fun and games. I could not, however, let this opportunity pass, and I started with them. "Looky there, sucking up with the boss's daughter, eh?" Wait till your teammates hear about this tomorrow. Oh, come on, Bill. You wouldn't do that to your old good friend, Zeke pleaded. Since he outweighed me about 40 pounds or more, since I'd already felt the pressure of those vice-like arms, I allowed him to have his indiscretion, and we would remain friends between us to this day. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Again, the name of the book, if you want to be able to pick it up yourself, I'm only about halfway through. I'm probably going to finish it in the next week or two. Is Memories of a Ball Player. I got it off of eBay for really like less than $5. So you get a lot of stories from the 1930s. Again, an era that a lot of people don't really remember at this point that are collectors now, because we really weren't alive for it. Maybe our grandparents were there and were fans of some of these ball players if they're still around, but that's kind of stretching it. I think that's why these players have kind of gone a little bit out of favor in the hobby in a little bit as far as like coveted items. So you can still get really good deals from cards in the 1930s and 40s if you're not going after the all-time greats, but you can still get some really great cards of some really great players of some really great sets if you're just willing to kind of entertain yourself and learn a little bit more about the era and the sets they're from. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll be back soon.